Hey guys, I'm Bobby here. Now, first and foremost, I'd like to quickly apologise for not making one of these videos in quite some months. I promise I'll try and do more, certainly down the line. Second of all, I'd just like to quickly say that this story contains lots of mentions of suicide, depression and medicine. So if, of course, any of you guys are sensitive to that, I would maybe recommend checking out another video from me. And also, I'd just like to say that if any of you have been affected by, issues such as suicide and depression, I genuinely hope you are doing okay. And yeah, anyways, enjoy. Does anyone remember the SpongeBob episode, The Sponge Who Could Fly, that aired in March 2003? It was dubbed The Lost Episode by its commercials based on the episode's storyline, where Patchy the pirate used a treasure map to find the SpongeBob episode that he lost. The night before the episode aired, I was sick with the neurovirus, I was vomiting almost every 5 minutes and I was feeling too ill to fall asleep, so I stayed up and watched TV. Around 2:30am, my stomach started to settle, so I planned to turn off the TV and tried to fall asleep. But as I was reaching for my remote control, the opening for the SpongeBob TV show started playing. SpongeBob was my favourite show at that time, so I couldn't miss out on watching it. Although, it's kind of strange that they were showing SpongeBob in the middle of the night, but I didn't think much of it. When the opening played, I noticed that the contrast of the animation was slightly darker than usual, and the theme song sounded a bit harsh and raspy. This made me feel a little uncomfortable, but I also tried brushing that off. The title card read Lost Episode, so I figured that there was a mishap and Nickelodeon was accidentally airing The Sponge Who Could Fly. When the episode started playing, it immediately looked out of the ordinary. It started off with SpongeBob sitting on his bed, slouched and looking downward with a somber look on his face. This was definitely not like himself. SpongeBob is so optimistic all the time. Why would he be acting like this? Another thing I noticed is that there was no sign of Gary, his pet snail. After about 10 seconds of seeing SpongeBob like this, he let out a big sigh, then looked over to the bedside barrel, and the screen zoomed in on a pill bottle that was beside his clock. Once the screen zoomed in close enough to read the text on the bottle, it showed that this was a Prozac bottle. The show then panned to a scene with a much brighter contrast, showing SpongeBob taking one of the pills, then running off smiling and laughing. The fact that SpongeBob had to take pills to be, well, himself, made me feel uneasy, especially because mental disorders and antidepressants are more mature themes that obviously shouldn't find a place in any kids' cartoon. It should be noted that this was seen on a show intended for kids. The screen then flipped back to the original scene of SpongeBob looking distressed, while at the same time changing the contrast back to the darker one. The screen froze on SpongeBob for a few seconds, and flickered to a new scene. This scene showed SpongeBob at his desk, the same one that he used in the episode Procrastination, with his Prozac bottle, a piece of paper, and a pencil. In this scene, instead of staying at one contrast, the colours kept on flickering from light to dark. SpongeBob gripped the pencil in his hand, and a tear rolled down his face. The part that bothered me the most was that the tear didn't look like the usual blue cartoon-style tears the characters in SpongeBob usually cry out. This tear looked completely realistic, as if there had been a drop of water rolling down my TV. From his eyes, SpongeBob wiped the tear from his face with his sleeve and began to write on the paper, reading out loud what he was writing. "I can't take it anymore," he said as soon as he got that sentence out. A faint noise started playing in the background. It sounded like a child crying. This noise continued playing as SpongeBob continued writing. "My life's been horrible and hasn't got better. My best friend Patrick is only my best friend because he doesn't know any better. My neighbour Squidward hates my guts. He'd probably be happy if I wasn't around anymore." SpongeBob stopped writing and talking and started weeping loudly. The colour flicking started getting faster and the cries in the background started getting louder. And it sounded like more children were beginning to cry. It could have just been my imagination, but I remember hearing one of the children very faintly yell, "He's gonna do it." The children's cries get louder and the colours keep flickering faster as SpongeBob keeps writing. "The only job I can get is being a fry cook at the Trusty Crab. My boss Mr. Krabs refuses to give me an actual paycheck and he basically uses me to get more customers. I'm in my 20s and I still don't have a driver's license. Sandy is the only girl I've ever had in my life, and even she's just a friend. She's never had any interest in me. I'm pretty sure she's only my friend because she feels sorry for me. I'm sorry for hurting anyone at all for doing this, but I just can't live like this anymore." The screen froze for a few seconds, and then the show continued with SpongeBob writing his final sentence. The contrast stayed dark instead of flickering from light to dark, and the children stopped crying. It was absolute silence except for SpongeBob saying, "Goodbye." The cries came back. SpongeBob quickly stood up, twisted off the lid on the Prozac bottle, dipped his head back, and let all the pills in the bottle fill into his mouth and swallowed them all whole. The screen switched and the animation was darker, but still visible. SpongeBob clutched his stomach and vomited realistic pale greenish-orange stomach file. It was clear that his body was trying to cleanse itself from the overdose, but it was no use. SpongeBob collapsed onto the floor and lied there motionless until the screen turned to static. Needless to say, I was scared out of my mind, and sleep was out of the question. Recently, I've been looking for this episode all over the internet, but not even one website seems to have it. If you recognize this episode, please let me know. Oh, that was certainly an interesting story, to say the least. Now, of course, yes, I do apologise for not doing one of these for quite a few months. I know. I'll try and get back into it. I always say this kind of stuff all the time. It's pretty getting annoying for you guys to hear, but, So that was sure an interesting story, and, with a sort of interesting, overdone, but interesting-ish premise. Well, okay, I say this kind of because, the whole trope of in Lost episode creepypastas, the whole trope of, character gets depressed, kills himself, pretty overused, especially themed with suicide. First of all, the name of the story, SpongeBob's Suicide. Second of all, that's not really even the name of the episode. Second of all, kind of just a copy, of Squidward Suicide. And, Squidward Suicide is like, the first ever Lost episode creepypasta, like, ever, which I've somehow not narrated, probably will narrate in the future. But, yeah. Okay, so now let's actually talk more about the episode itself. The episode was decent-ish. The main issue is that it didn't really have, much of a plot, per se. Like, I kind of like it when the actual episode can be a bit, creepy and rather unsettling at times. However, I kind of prefer it when, there's, like, an actual, plot in place. This one was kind of just SpongeBob being upset, taking meds, and, killing himself in the end, which doesn't really have much substance, kind of feel like, and, I wish there should have been, more, maybe to it, more build-up to, SpongeBob wanted to do that, like a montage. Something I actually am kind of thinking about now, which probably would have improved, showing SpongeBob going to Krusty Krab and, seeing, people around and, his day-to-day life and, I think that's something that would have, improved it a bit more, but it was decent-ish, to say the least. And now another thing, which is partially overused in, of course, the Lost episode creepypastas, however, can work in some instances, the whole thing of the episode being discovered on TV. Now, that is, something that, of course, I just said a lot of Lost episode creepypastas tended to do, which I personally don't mind, because it can definitely work in some scenarios, which, however, the whole thing of, I tried to find things of it, information about it online, but I couldn't, is kind of an overused trope, but, I mean, however, I feel like if something like this were actually to air on TV, I think there'd be maybe, some news coverage and some other people, I mean, again, it's creepypasta, so it doesn't really matter, however, to be fair, though, there's kind of an interesting theory that maybe due to, they said they had neurovirus, and maybe because of that, maybe they could have possibly hallucinated the episode, which, come to think of it, that might sound a bit ridiculous, but, that is something kind of a unique premise, I think, would possibly make the story, maybe just a tad bit more interesting, but, So my final thoughts on the story, it was a decent attempt. It was nothing absolutely amazing, but at the same time, it was nothing terribly awful at the same time. So my final rating of the story would have to be a 6 out of 10. Again, it's somewhat decently-ish, okay story, which could use a bit of work, maybe slightly more detail to, slightly flesh it out a bit more, but it was still alright. So anyways, guys, I just had to quickly apologise. I'm sorry I've not done one of these in months. I'm going to try to get back into the swing of these soon. I have some more content planned. I've just been a bit, not demotivated, but just kind of lacking ideas a bit, but don't worry, I'll try and definitely get more out. I mean, I say this all the time, you're probably sick of hearing it at this point, but yeah. Anyways, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, turn on notification mode so you don't miss the next video. Comment whiteboard if you made it this far, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.